How's it going, everyone? Back with another exciting Everquest adventure. Today we're going to be doing another Raid Tactics 101 video on a really important topic. Well, I think it's important. We're going to be talking about clean tagging and dirty tagging. What is clean tagging and dirty tagging? Why do we do it? And then how do we do it? So first, what is clean tagging and dirty tagging? Essentially, you have two taggers. You have the dirty tagger and the clean tagger. And what happens in most cases is that there's a large group of mobs that somebody is kiting. Bard's really common. So the Bard is kiting a large group of mobs. He gathers aggro on all these different mobs. He's kiting them around something. And then the dirty tagger goes up to that large clump of mobs and tags something out of it, which in turn puts the dirty tagger on the aggro table of all the other mobs. And then the dirty tagger pulls the mob out of aggro radius of all the other mobs, and then the clean tagger comes up and tags that mob and then brings it back into camp. It's for the people to kill the boss, get experience, get fat loots, and stuff like that. Now, I kind of already answered that question, but why do we do it? Because the reason you do it for is to get a mob out of another group of mobs without the group getting aggro. So you want to cleanly get your target mob out of a big clump of mobs and not have any of the other players on the aggro table of all the other mobs, because then if something bad happens, then all the mobs come and they freaking beat the crap out of you. Now, why do we do it? For that case right there. So you don't have to deal with 30 other mobs. You only have to deal with just one mob. And if something happens to the puller, or the kiter or whatever, then the raid group or whatever is clean. They're not on the aggro table of any of the other mobs. So that's kind of a gist of what it is. Now I'm going to show an example of how it works. Alright, so let's click over to this little happy handy map that I did make to explain this, because explaining this in game would be really difficult, because I would have to coordinate a group of people, start a kite somewhere, and have everyone coordination and be explaining it as we're doing it, and that's just going to be really, really difficult. Okay, so first let's talk about aggro radius. And this is fairly common knowledge. As everyone knows, mobs have an aggro radius around them. If a player comes into the aggro radius of a mob on the server tick, that mob will aggro onto the player. So the Bard comes into the aggro radius of mob 1, the server ticks, boom, he goes on the aggro table, and then the pursuit is on. The Bard is kiting mob 1 away, and mob 1 is chasing him because he's in his home and he's trying to hurt his freaking family, and mob 1, he really wants to beat him up. Now we're going to talk about another common game mechanic that most people know, if not all people know, is assisting. Say the Bard, he's kiting around the firewall here. He is on the aggro table of mob 1. Mob 1 is chasing. Mob 1 runs into the aggro radius of mob 2. Mob 1, if they assist, which in this case all the mobs are going to assist, mob 1 turns to mob 2 and says, "Hey buddy, help me get this Bard. He's in our home. He's trying to steal all of our loots." So then the Bard then goes onto the aggro table of mob 2. Now you have both mobs who are chasing after the Bard, and the Bard is running like the wind as fast as he can. He's kiting around the firewall here. Okay, so that's pretty common knowledge about assisting and like aggro radius and stuff. Now we're going to talk about threat level, and I'm not going to pretend that I know what the values are. I'm sure some people who know really know the mechanics know what threat levels are. But in this case, since the Bard didn't directly do any damage to mob 1, he didn't cast any spells, he didn't cast any songs, he didn't melee or anything, he just has body aggro. And body aggro is very, very low threat level. So we'll say it's like 1. Again, I don't know what the values are. So he has very, very low threat level. And since Mob 2 is just assisting Mob 1, the Bard has very, very low threat level as well. So any sort of like direct action towards Mob 1 or Mob 2 will strip that mob off of the Bard. So let's say the Wizzy comes in, he runs up, he Flux Staffs Mob 2, he now goes on the aggro table. Flux Staff causes a lot higher aggro than just body aggro that the Bard has, we'll say 5. Now, that generated more aggro, so that mob's going to pull off and start running toward the Wizzy. But since Mob 2 is in the aggro radius of Mob 1, Mob 2 says, hey buddy, this guy, he just Flux Staffed me. So the Wizzy is now going to also go on the aggro table of Mob 1, but he only has an aggro of 1. Because again, Mob 1, he would just be assisting at this time. So at this point, the Wizzy, he's done more aggro than the Bard, so then Mob 2, he pulls off, and he's running towards the Wizzy, and the Wizzy's running for his life. Okay, so that's kind of how it works with aggro mechanics and assisting and aggro tables and whatnot. Okay, so let's set up a scenario where a group is going to go into the plane of fear. The Bard, he needs the piece for his epic, and their plan is the Bard's going to zone in. He's going to body aggro everything. He's going to grab all the mobs, and he's going to kite them around the firewall. The Monk's going to be the dirty tagger. He's going to, as the Bard comes around, he tags a mob out of the group of mobs, and he pulls it back to the clean tagger. The Wizzy's going to be the clean tagger. After the target mob is out of the aggro radius of the kite, the Wizard's going to Flux Staff, and he's going to cleanly pull that mob into the group where we're going to have a Pally and a Cleric down here and all that good jazz. So let's get them all set up here. So we got our Pally, we've got our Cleric, we've got our Bard here who's going to kite, we got the Dirty Tagger, and we have our Wizzy who's going to be the Clean Tagger. Then, of course, we have our mobs. Just like that. I'll put him here. Alright, so we'll say the Bard, he zones in, he runs over to Mob 1, he gets into the aggro radius of Mob 1, which then the Bard gains aggro. He goes on the aggro table of Mob 1. It's just body aggro, so it's very, very light aggro. The Bard then, he's kiting Mob 1, and Mob 1 runs, he's dragging him by other mobs to get assist aggro. So Mob 1, he runs into the aggro radius of Mob 2, and now the Bard, he aggroes onto Mob 2. Again, it's just assist aggro, so it's very, very light. Then the Bard, he's running like the wind, and you have Mob 1 and Mob 2 who are chasing after the Bard. They come into the aggro radius of Mob 3, and then the Bard now goes on to the aggro table of Mob 3. Again, it's just assist and body aggro, so it's very light. Now this Bard, he's now dirty. He is very dirty. He's on the aggro table of all of the mobs. And the Bard now is kiting these guys away. He's running around the firewall. He has a bunch of them. They're all angry and they want to friggin' beat him up. So the Bard is out of pursuit. They're casting, trying to beat him up and trying to root him. And again, the Bard is cruising around the firewall in this big massive kite. Okay, now we have our Dirty Tagger. The Dirty Tagger is going to go up to the large group of mobs while they're at the bottom here and then tag one out. So we have our Monk. He runs up. He targets Mob 1. He throws a Javelin. So now that Monk now goes onto the aggro table of Mob 1. Since he threw a Javelin, it generates a lot more aggro. We'll say 5. Since that's higher than the body aggro, then that Mob 1 is now, that Mob 1 is now chasing after the Monk. But since Mob 1, who he aggro, is in the aggro radius of Mobs 2 and Mobs 3, that Monk now goes on to the aggro table of Mob 2 and 3. But since it's just assist, it's not a lot of aggro. It's just assist aggro. But still, now that monk, now he is very dirty. He's on the aggro table of all the different mobs. If the bard dies, all 3 of these mobs are going to bolt down to the monk, and they're going to try to beat him up. So now the monk, he has mob 1, he's in pursuit. The monk is kiting back to the group, and the Wizzy comes up, and he waits for mob 1 to get out of the aggro radius of all the other mobs. And the Wizzy's going to Flux Staff. He spams his Flux Staff a couple times, which now on mob 1, the Wizzy goes onto the aggro table of mob 1. He spams his Flux Staff, which then gives more aggro than the Javelin. So now that mob, he breaks off of the monk because the wizard generated more aggro, and the mob 1 is now coming down to the Wizzy, and he wants to beat him up. That wizard, he's clean. He's clean. He tagged when mob 1 was out of the aggro radius. Now at this point, the Pally runs up, flash the lights mob 1, which puts the Pally onto the aggro table of mob 1. Since he flashed the light, it generates a huge amount of aggro, which is 50, which then pulls the mob off of the Wizzy, and then the Pally tanks. The wizard's casting, he's beating him up. The monk comes down to DPS the mob, and the cleric is healing the Pally, which actually would put the cleric on the aggro table of mob 1 as well. They drop the mob. The Wizzy, he evacs everyone out, and then the bard runs out through the firewall, or through the castle there, and he zones out. Mission accomplished. They got the mob, blah, 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 blah. So now, we're going to reset now and do a different scenario. Okay, so in this scenario, things don't really go as planned. It's going to be the same type of thing. The bard zones in first. He body aggro's mob 1. He rounds up all the other mobs, and then he's kiting them around the firewall. The other group members come in, and they get set up. Same thing. Monk's the dirty tagger. The wizard's the clean tagger. The monk runs up, and he throws a javelin at mob 1, which then makes him dirty. The javelin generates more aggro than the body aggro, so that's going to cause mob 1 to tag off or get peeled out of the main kite. Now that monk is now dirty because mob 1 was in the assist radius of mob 2 and mob 3, and they said, we're going to come help you, mob 1, as soon as we take care of this pesky bard. Now that monk, he is dirty. Again, he's on the aggro table of all the other mobs, but again, it's just assist aggro on the other ones, so it is very, very light. Monk pulls down to the Wizzy. Mob 1 gets out of the aggro radius. The Wizzy comes up, and right as he's about to Flux Staff, mob 1 nukes the crap out of the monk and drops him down to like 40% health, and the monk is now hurting. The Wizzy, he Flux Staffs mob 1, which then puts the wizard onto the aggro table. Since he Flux Staffed a couple times, that generates 10, which then is more aggro than the javelin, so the mob 1 runs towards the Wizzy. As soon as the mob gets into the camp, the paladin flash of lights. Oh, and that Wizzy, he's clean. He's clean because he Flux Staffed when they were out of the aggro radius, so he didn't get on all 3 of the mobs' aggro tables, only one of them. So the Wizzy is clean. The paladin, he flash of lights mob 1 because he's the tank, and that generates a huge amount of aggro. So the mob now breaks off, and the paladin's tanking. The wizard's casting. The poor monk, he's down pretty low, but the monk is still dirty. He's still on the aggro rate table of all these other mobs. So now the cleric, he sees the monk, and he's like, oh crap, that monk is almost dead. I better toss him a heal. The poor guy doesn't quite know the mechanics of clean tagging and dirty tagging, so he tosses a heal on the monk. Now, since that monk is dirty, that cleric now goes on the aggro table of mobs 2 and mobs 3. And now that cleric, he's dirty now. He didn't realize it because he doesn't quite... it's not his fault. He just didn't know. So the monk goes, flops, and slash Qs because he wants to clean himself. He wants to become clean now so he can join him on the fight. So the monk goes, he flops, he slash Qs, and then he comes back in the game. Now, since that monk slash queued, he is now clean because he relogged. The only person who's dirty now is that cleric, and the cleric, again, the poor guy, he doesn't understand. So now mob 2 roots the bard, and the bard dies. The mobs catch up to him, and the bard dies. And everybody's like, the bard says, oh, I'm down. And everybody's like, well, whatever. It's okay, because everybody in camp is clean. But little did they know, the cleric healed somebody who was dirty. Now mobs 2 and 3 turn, and they run down to the group, and at this point, they're like, wait a minute, who's dirty? Who was dirty? And the whole group wipes, and then everyone dies. So the moral of the story of this, and I'm going to press on this a lot, is don't heal and do not buff people who are dirty. Know who your clean taggers are. Know who your dirty taggers are. That's very, very, very important. And we're going to set up one more scenario, and then that is going to do it. Okay, let's do our last and final scenario. It's going to be the exact same setup. Again, things aren't going to go as planned. The bard rounds them all up, pulls them all in. The monk, he dirty tags away from the other mobs. The wizard clean tags out, so the wizard is clean. He waited until he was the mob 1 was out of the ag radius of mob 2 or 3. But while the monk's coming back to group, who is dirty, the pally, he tosses him a buff. He gives him a buff. He doesn't, again, like poor guy, he doesn't quite understand the mechanics of clean tagging and dirty tagging. So now that pally, since he buffed somebody who is dirty, he is now dirty. He goes on the aggro table of mob 2 and mob 3. And again, it's just assist aggro, so it's not pulling aggro off of the bard yet, but that pally, he is dirty. Now at this point, the pally, he doesn't realize that he's dirty because he buffed a dirty tagger. He tells the cleric, hey, will you toss me an ego? And the cleric says, yeah, sure. So the cleric, he egos the pally, who is dirty now. So now the cleric is dirty because the cleric egoed the pally. Now the cleric goes on the aggro table of actually mob 1, mob 2, and mob 3. And again, the aggro is very light. So now the cleric is dirty. Now the cleric, he turns to the Wizzy and he says, hey Wizzy, will you damage shield me? Don't ask why. Will you damage shield me? And the wizard, who is clean, says, yeah, sure. So the Wizzy damage shield the cleric, who is now dirty because the cleric healed the pally, because the pally buffed the monk. Now that Wizzy goes from clean, now he's dirty. And now the Wizzy goes on all the freaking aggro tables, all the mobs. Now everyone is dirty, and they don't realize it, all because one person, they made a mistake. They buffed a dirty tagger, then the pally got dirty, then the cleric who buffed the pally, then he got dirty, and then the wizard, he buffed the cleric, who then got dirty, all because the one person didn't understand the mechanics. Now what happens? The freaking bard gets rooted again, dies, all of the mobs run into the group because everyone's dirty and everyone dies. So the big moral of the story is, guys, in these situations when you're raiding, know who your dirty taggers are, know who your clean taggers are. Because if you buff a dirty tagger, that can, and somebody buffs you, and then somebody buffs them, and then somebody buffs them, that starts a chain reaction where like 15 people can be dirty. So know who your dirty taggers are, know who your clean taggers are, and do not buff them and do not heal them unless you are told to do. Because a dirty tagger who knows all the mechanics are going to know, okay, I'm dirty, I'm going to clean myself first. If I'm a monk, I'm going to flop and slash Q, which then cleans me. If I'm a wizard, I can evac, which cleans me. Or you can just camp out and come back in, which then cleans you. So yeah, that's the moral of the story, is because I've seen it over and over and over and over again where somebody doesn't quite understand. And I didn't either, guys. I did the same thing. I healed on my druid. I healed somebody who was dirty. I did not know the mechanics, and I wiped a whole pod group. I was like, oh, and I see it over and over again of people who don't quite understand. So know who your clean taggers are, know who your dirty taggers are. But yeah, I really hope this helps. I really hope it helps. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I got all the mechanics right. But I just wanted to go over that because I see a lot of questions about it. I see a lot of raid groups wipe and die because of it. Because again, it's not their fault. People they just don't understand. But again, I'm going to hammer it home again. Don't heal your dirty taggers. Don't buff them. Don't do anything that is beneficial towards them, and know who they are. So that will not happen to you, and you will wipe a group. And if you accidentally do, and you're like, oh crap, I got dirty, you tell your raid group or whoever, I'm dirty, and then camp out, and then come back in to clean yourself. But I think that's gonna do it. I hope the video made sense and I wasn't too scattered. Yeah, good stuff to know though, guys. It really is a good stuff to know. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. If you have any questions or comments, post below. If I made some errors, let me know and I can remake the video or whatever. Anyways, that's going to do it for me, guys. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you're having a good year. Hope you're having a good day, guys. Stay safe out there. That's going to do it for me. Peace.